John, a successful businessman, was driving through the city after a long day at work. The rain was pouring down, and he just wanted to get home and rest. However, something caught his attention as he passed by a busy street. In the middle of the sidewalk, he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms, completely soaked by the rain. Her desperate look made him slow down the car. He tried to look away, but something inside him prevented him from moving forward. Parking the car, John got out, ignoring the rain that soaked his suit. He approached the woman, who seemed to be at the end of her strength. The baby was crying softly, trying to snuggle against her mother for protection. "Are you okay?" John asked, his voice soft but full of concern. The woman looked at him, surprised. "I am. I just have nowhere to go." These words were a blow to John, who realized that he could not simply get back in the car and continue with his life. Without thinking much, he knew that he had to help. This moment was not a simple encounter. Something made him believe that he had been placed there for a reason. And now he had to decide what to do next. John looked at the woman and her baby, feeling an impulse that he himself did not fully understand. He knew he could not leave them there, in the rain, helpless. Without thinking twice, he took the key to his house from his pocket and handed it to her. "Here, go to my house. It's a safe, warm place. You and your son can rest there." The woman looked at him, completely shocked. "Your house? You don't even know me." John gave her an encouraging smile. "I know it sounds crazy, but trust me. I can't just ignore what I'm seeing. You don't have to do anything in return. Just go. Please let me help." The woman hesitated, looking at the key in her hand, unsure if she should trust him. She had been fooled before, but something in John's eyes made her believe he was different. The baby, still crying, seemed to decide for her. With a sigh, she took the key, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Thank you," she murmured, still in shock at his sudden generosity. The woman, now holding John's key in her hands, was visibly confused and hesitant. She held the baby tightly and looked at John as if she expected him to change his mind at any moment. She finally spoke. "Why are you doing this? What do you gain from this?" John sighed and looked directly into her eyes. "To be honest, I don't know. I just know that I can't leave you and your child like this, in this rain. I'm not expecting anything in return. I need to help." The woman was still suspicious. "You're rich, aren't you? People like you don't usually care about people like me. Why would you care now?" she asked, a little defiantly, but with a sadness that showed the hardship of the life she had led. John looked at her, understanding her distrust. "Maybe most people don't care, but today I do. I saw you and your son, and I couldn't ignore it." She finally looked at the baby and realized she needed to trust. "My name is Maria." João smiled slightly at the mention of her name. "Maria, you and your son need help. Let's get in the car. I'll take you to my house. You can rest there. I promise it won't be for long, just until you recover and find a solution." Still hesitant, Maria agreed. Getting into such a luxurious car was something she had never imagined. She adjusted Pedro, who had calmed down, on her lap and watched João as he drove. The silence in the car was only broken by the sound of the rain falling heavily outside. João was also quiet, reflecting on what he had just done. He knew it was an unusual gesture, but something inside him was driving him to act like this. When they stopped in front of the large house, Maria was astonished. "Is this where you live?" she asked, looking at the mansion. João smiled, trying to ease the tension. "Yes, and now it's the place where you'll be safe. Let's go inside." She still couldn't believe all this was happening. Standing in front of the huge mansion, Maria held Peter and the keys tightly, still in disbelief. She looked at John, trying to understand why someone like him would make such a generous offer. "This seems too good to be true," she said. "How can I trust you? What do you really want?" John sighed, knowing that her distrust was understandable. "I don't want anything from you, Maria. I know it's hard to believe, but all I want is to make sure that you and your son are safe. If you don't want to stay, I understand, but please go inside and rest for now." Maria looked at Peter, who was already sleeping in her arms, exhausted, and knew that she couldn't refuse his help. Okay, she said hesitantly. But if I sense that something is wrong, I'll leave. John nodded. I don't expect you to trust me right away. I just want to help. She finally entered the house, feeling the welcoming warmth of the environment, but still uncertain about what the future would bring, with the keys still in her hands and the sleeping baby in her arms. Maria took her first steps inside the house, hesitantly. The warmth that enveloped the place was comforting, contrasting sharply with the cold and wet feeling of the rain that was still falling outside. She looked around, trying to take in the environment. Every detail of the house seemed to reflect the comfort and wealth that Maria had only seen in movies or passed by store windows when walking down the streets. The marble floors gleamed underfoot, and the carefully positioned furniture created an ambience of elegance and sophistication. It was as if each piece had been handpicked to compose that impeccable setting. Maria could not believe she was there, standing in that place, where everything seemed so far from her reality. João, after going out to get towels, quickly returned and handed them to her. Here, use these to dry yourself. I'll also get some dry clothes for you and Pedro. He can't stay wet for long. Maria accepted the towels, still a little embarrassed by the situation, but extremely grateful. She began to dry his face and then carefully wrapped Peter in it, trying to make sure he was dry and warm. As she did so, she thought about how all of this had happened so quickly. Just hours ago, she had been standing in the rain, not knowing what she would do to protect her son. Now, she was inside a luxurious home, safe and sheltered. John walked away again, climbing the stairs to the second floor, while Maria continued drying the baby. Peter, now comfortable, moved slightly, but seemed to be in a peaceful, deep sleep. It was a relief for Maria to finally see him relaxed and at peace. As she waited, Maria couldn't help but wonder, why had John been so kind to her? Why would someone with so much money and power choose to help a stranger, a homeless woman who had nothing but her son in her arms? Logic dictated that people like him didn't care about people like her. And yet, here he was, offering not just shelter, but an entire home for her and Peter. Can I trust this? She wondered as she looked up at the ornate ceiling and the silk curtains hanging from the windows. Even with the generous gesture, the uncertainty wouldn't leave her. Maria knew that life on the streets was cruel, and nothing came for free. But as she looked at Peter, who was now safe, she felt that, at least for now, she had no choice but to trust. This was an opportunity she could never have foreseen, but it might be the only chance she would have to give her son a break from the hard life they were leading. John returned shortly, carrying some clothes in his hands. Here are some dry clothes, he said, laying them on the couch next to Maria. They may not be your size, but they are comfortable. You can change in the next room if you want. And don't worry, I won't bother you. Maria thanked him quietly, unsure of how to properly express her gratitude. She held her clothes in one hand and stood up, heading towards the room that João had indicated. Walking through that house felt like a dream. The softness of the carpet under her feet and the cozy atmosphere made her feel, for a moment, in a completely different world from the one she was used to. Upon entering the room, Maria closed the door behind her and sighed deeply. She left Pedro lying on the bed and began to change her clothes. The dry clothes provided immediate comfort, and she could finally feel the warmth of a protected environment. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten, being dry, warm, and safe. Pedro, in turn, continued to sleep soundly, wrapped in the soft towel. Maria looked at him tenderly, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Although she wanted to trust João completely and accept this generosity, the scars of life on the streets made her always keep one foot behind. She didn't know how long that would last, but for now, Pedro was safe. And that was the most important thing. After changing, Maria returned to the living room, where João was waiting for her, sitting in an armchair. He looked at her and smiled kindly. How are you feeling now? Better? She nodded, still a little uncomfortable about the whole situation, but relieved to no longer be in the rain. Yes, thank you. I don't know how I can thank you for all this. João shook his head, dismissing the idea that she needed to thank him. You don't need to thank me, Maria. I only did what anyone should do. What matters is that you and Pedro are safe now. Maria looked at him, wanting to believe that the world could still have people like that. People who helped without hesitation, wanting nothing in return simply because it was the right thing to do. I just don't know how long we can stay here, she said with a hint of concern in her voice. John smiled again, but this time with a more serious look. Stay as long as you need. Don't worry about it. You're my guests, and I want you to feel at home. Maria, sitting on the couch in John's house, reflected on everything that had happened. The safety and comfort of that home were a complete contrast to life on the streets, where she lived in constant fear. Although she was grateful for John's help, she still found it difficult to trust fully. Years of hardship had taught her to be cautious, and his unexpected generosity seemed almost surreal. She looked at Pedro, who was sleeping peacefully, and felt a mixture of relief and fear for the future. John, on the other hand, was also in a moment of reflection. Ever since he had helped Maria and Pedro, he felt that something in his life had changed. The void that he used to fill with work and success seemed smaller now. He realized that, more than anything else, the act of helping had brought meaning to his lonely routine. As he watched Maria, he knew that this connection was special, something that fate had placed in their path. Amidst the silence, Maria broke the ice. "You seem lost in thought," she said, curious about what was going on in Joao's head. He smiled, saying that he was simply reflecting on how life sometimes changes in unexpected ways. Maria nodded in agreement. "I never thought I would be here either," she admitted, a hint of sadness in her voice. "But even with everything that has happened, I am grateful to be here now with Pedro." Joao, seeing an opportunity to strengthen their trust, asked about Maria's story. She hesitated, but finally shared a little of what she had been through, how she had lost everything and ended up on the streets. Her every word carried the weight of the hardships she had faced, and Joao, listening in silence, felt a great respect for the strength she demonstrated. "You did everything you could for Pedro," Joao said. "That shows what an incredible mother you are. You fought, and that's what matters." Maria was touched by his words. For the first time, someone had recognized her efforts, and it touched her deeply. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but with Joao's help, there might be a real chance of rebuilding her life. Maria sat on the couch, watching Pedro sleep in her arms as Joao disappeared into the kitchen. The living room was silent except for the distant sound of rain gently pattering against the windows. The house was warm, welcoming, and for the first time in a long time, Maria felt safe. But physical security didn't eliminate the uncertainty in her heart. She still didn't know what the future would bring, but being here, in this moment, felt like a much-needed respite from her turbulent life. Little by little, Maria began to feel more at ease in the space. She looked around at the decor, noticing the details. The heavy curtains, the soft carpet beneath her feet, the elegant, well-positioned furniture. Every single thing in the house seemed to have been carefully chosen. For someone who had spent so long without a home, being here was like a surreal experience. She could almost feel like she belonged in another world, far from her reality on the streets. As she pondered, John returned from the kitchen, carrying a tray with steaming soup and fresh bread. The smell was inviting, and Mary realized how hungry she was. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten a hot meal. John placed the tray on the coffee table and sat back down in the armchair, watching Mary. "I prepared something simple," he said a little shyly. "I hope you like it. Please eat." Mary looked at the soup, then at John, and smiled shyly. "Thank you. It means a lot to me," she said, feeling a wave of gratitude rise in her chest again. Without hesitation, she began to eat. The warm taste of the soup was comforting, and each spoonful seemed to bring a little more peace to her weary soul. As she ate, John watched her calmly. He was happy to see that she and Peter were, at least for the moment, safe and warm. Deep down, he still wondered why he had made such an impulsive decision, but as he looked at Mary and her son, he felt that he had done the right thing. This woman needed help, and he was there to offer what he could. "Do you have any plans for the future, Mary?" John asked, breaking the silence. He didn't want to pressure her, but he also knew that eventually she would need more than just temporary shelter. She would need stability. Mary hesitated, holding her spoon in the air for a moment. She had never thought of she couldn't really think about the future in any concrete way because her life on the streets was a daily struggle for survival. Planning for the future seemed far away, almost impossible. But now, with Pedro safe and fed, with a roof over his head, she knew she had to start thinking about something beyond tomorrow. I don't know, she admitted, putting her spoon back in the bowl. I took each day as it came. There wasn't much time to think about the future, when all I could do was try to survive. She sighed, feeling the weight of her words. But now, with Pedro, I need to find a way to make sure he has a better life. He deserves better than that. John nodded, understanding her dilemma. He knew Maria's circumstances weren't easy, and that she was doing the best she could with what she had. Have you ever thought about going back to work? Maybe we can figure something out together, see what you can do from here on out. It doesn't have to be anything big right now, but little by little, we can try to build something. Maria smiled slightly, appreciating John's concern. It was an idea she had long ago put aside. Before everything fell apart, she had a simple job, but after losing everything, the path back to the workforce seemed unattainable. Now, however, with John offering to help, the idea of regaining control of her life didn't seem so impossible. I would love that, she said. But to be honest, I don't even know where to start. It's been so long since I've worked that I feel like I've lost my touch. John smiled encouragingly. Don't worry about it. One step at a time. The important thing is that you're willing. I can help with that too. We can see what you like to do, what you have experience in, and take the first steps towards rebuilding your life. Maria looked at him, once again touched by John's generosity. She didn't know what had made this man care so much about her and Pedro, but she was deeply grateful. For the first time, she felt that perhaps, with his help, she could actually give her son a better life, a life that she had not been able to provide until now. The meal continued in silence for a few moments, as Maria finished her soup and looked at Pedro, who was still sleeping peacefully on the couch next to her. Seeing her son safe and warm was all that mattered to her at that moment. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream of a more stable future. I know things won't change overnight, Joao said, getting up to collect the empty bowls. But you don't have to do this alone. I'm here to help in any way I can. Maria nodded, feeling lighter, as if the burden of years of hardship was finally starting to lift, at least for now. The road was still long, but now she was no longer alone. And that, for her, was already a victory. After the meal, Maria sat on the couch, watching Pedro sleeping next to her. The emotions of the night began to weigh on her. The weeks of hardship, the accumulated fatigue of living on the streets, and the constant uncertainty were now mixed with a deep gratitude for finally being in a safe place. She looked at Joao, who was now collecting the plates and bowls from the meal, feeling a weight in her heart that she could barely describe. She wanted to believe that, somehow, everything that was happening was real, that this shelter, this generosity, would last more than just one night. But the years of struggle had taught her not to trust so easily, and she didn't know how to allow herself to let her guard down completely. Sitting in the welcoming silence of the house, Maria began to feel tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to seem weak in front of Joao. But it was impossible to hold back all the emotion that was coming to the surface now that she and Pedro were, for the first time in months, in a place where they were safe. Her hands trembled slightly as she stroked Pedro's small head, feeling a mixture of relief and fear of what would come next. Joao came back from the kitchen, noticing the deep silence that hung over the room. He watched Maria, realizing that something inside her was breaking. She sat back down in her chair, not knowing what to say at first. It was clear that she was processing everything, but he also knew that some emotions were hard to put into words. Instead of speaking, he just stood there, silent, offering the calm presence he hoped would be enough at that moment. Maria, feeling Joao's gentle gaze on her, finally let the tears flow. It wasn't just because of the situation she was in, but because of everything she had been through up until now. All the days of uncertainty, all the nights she had feared for Pedro's safety, all the moments she thought she wouldn't be able to go on. Now, however, she was sitting in a comfortable place with Pedro safely inside, and it made her release everything she had held in for so long. "I'm sorry," she said in a whisper, trying to quickly wipe away her tears. "I didn't. I shouldn't be crying." John shook his head, smiling understandingly. "You don't have to apologize, Maria. Sometimes we need to cry. It's our bodies releasing the weight we've been carrying for so long." Maria tried to smile back, but the tears kept falling. "It's just this all feels so surreal. I never imagined that someone, especially someone like you, would do something like this for me and Pedro. I don't even know how to begin to thank you." John looked at her, realizing the depth of her words. He knew that for Maria, the simple act of trusting someone again was a huge step. "You don't have to thank me. Trust me, you've been through a lot, and helping you and Pedro is the least I can do." Maria looked at Pedro, sleeping, tears still streaming down his face. "He's everything to me," she said, her voice shaking. "Everything I have. And I just want to give him a better life. But sometimes it feels impossible." Joao felt the weight of her words, and for a moment he was silent, thinking. He stood up and walked over to the couch, sitting down next to her, something he had been hesitant to do before, for fear of seeming intrusive. Now, though, it felt like the right time. "Maria," he began, his voice soft, "you're already doing your best for him. Everything you've done so far has been to make sure he's safe, even in the worst of circumstances. That says a lot about the kind of mother you are." She looked at him, feeling a surge of emotion, even more intense. His words touched her deeply, because she knew how much she had worked, how much she had sacrificed to protect Pedro. But hearing someone else acknowledge it, especially someone who barely knew her, brought her a validation she hadn't known she needed. "I just don't know what to do now," Maria admitted, wiping her tears with her sleeve. "Now that we're here, I don't know what the next step is. I just want to make sure Pedro gets a chance." Joao nodded, understanding her uncertainty. He had thought about it too. Helping with shelter and food was the first step, but he knew Maria would need something more permanent, a way to rebuild her life and secure Pedro's future. "I don't expect you to have all the answers right now," he said. "And to be honest, I don't have all the answers either. But what I do know is that you don't have to do this alone. We'll find a way. It may take time, but Pedro will get the chance you want for him so badly." Maria looked at Joao, feeling a huge weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was facing the world alone. She had someone by her side, willing to help, willing to walk with her through this uncertain process. She smiled, a shy but genuine smile. "Thank you, Joao. I really do. I don't know where we would be now if it weren't for you." John just smiled back, feeling that the connection between them, something that had started so unexpectedly, was deeper than he had imagined. And for the first time in a long time, he also felt that he was in the right place, doing the right thing. A few days had passed since Maria and Pedro found shelter in Joao's house. During that time, Maria began to adjust to the new reality, still trying to believe that all of that was true. The security that the house provided and Joao's constant presence, who helped her without asking for anything in return, had begun to bring some peace to her mind. Pedro, in turn, seemed calmer than ever, playing around the house, safe and fed. Joao, in his own moments of reflection, realized how much his life had changed since he met Maria and Pedro. He hadn't planned any of this, but somehow, that unexpected encounter had given new meaning to his life. The loneliness he felt before, even surrounded by luxuries and comfort, seemed to have diminished. He found genuine satisfaction in helping Maria and her son, and it motivated him to do more. That morning, Joao had gone out to take care of some work, but he promised to be back soon. Maria, meanwhile, was enjoying the quiet of the house. She had started cleaning up a bit, helping out where she could as a way of expressing her gratitude. Although Joao insisted that she didn't have to worry about anything, Maria felt better about contributing in some way. When Joao finally returned, it was already early afternoon. He walked through the door and was greeted by Pedro, who was now running up to him with a smile on his face. The child's energy was contagious, and Joa bent down to pick him up, laughing at his enthusiasm.
Boy.
"Hey, little guy. How are you?" said John, rocking Peter gently. The baby laughed and reached out to touch John's face, as if he had known him for a long time. John felt a warmth in his chest as he held Peter, realizing how the presence of that little family had filled something he hadn't known was missing in his life. Mary appeared soon after, a smile on her lips as she watched the scene. "He's getting used to you," she said, happy to see Peter so comfortable in John's company. "And I've gotten used to him," replied John, still holding Peter. "He's a great little boy." Mary came closer and was silent for a moment, watching the growing bond between John and Peter. She still wondered how everything had happened so quickly and so naturally. The fear and uncertainty she had carried in the beginning began to dissipate, being replaced by a growing confidence. Even so, she knew that she couldn't depend on John forever. She needed to find a way to rebuild her life. "John," she began in a more serious tone, "I wanted to talk to you about the future. I can't keep depending on you like this forever. You've done a lot for us, and I'm grateful, but I need to find a way to move on." John, still holding Peter, nodded in understanding. He had known this moment would come, and he was prepared to offer his help. "I understand, Maria. And that's exactly why, for the last few days, I've been thinking about how I can help you in a more permanent way." Maria looked at him curiously, not knowing what he had in mind. "I talked to some people I know and managed to find some job opportunities for you," John explained. "Nothing too complicated at first, but I think it could be the first step towards rebuilding your life." Maria was surprised, and her eyes filled with emotion. She hadn't known what to expect from this conversation, but hearing that John had already thought of ways to help her get back on her feet touched her deeply. "You did this for me?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "Of course," John replied, smiling softly. "I said I would help you find a way. It's not much, but it might be the start of something. And I'll be around if you need more help." Mary was silent for a moment, processing everything. Tears began to form in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of hope, not despair. She had spent so long struggling alone, and now, finally, she felt like she was finding a way to move forward. I don't even know what to say," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You changed our lives, John. I'll never forget what you did for me and Peter." John set Peter back down and walked over to Mary, gently touching her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Mary. I'm glad I could help. And seeing you both well is enough for me." Mary smiled, still emotional. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel genuine hope. The future was still uncertain, but now, with John's help and her love for Peter, she knew she could find a way to move forward. They were no longer alone, and that made all the difference.